Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff Mom Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio. Today is a special episode for several reasons, but the number one might be that we are, for the first time, recording from our home studios.
Yes.
So, Samantha, why don't you describe to the listeners where you are recording from?
Well, I think I've already showed a video myself trying to set up this amazing equipment.
Oh, top notch.
Thank you. It was a 16-minute video, which should have been a 2-minute video.
Oh, God. Mine, if I had recorded all of mine, it would have been very long and a lot of cursing. I lied. I said it was a little cursing. It was a lot.
I do like that there were several listeners. I'm like, yes, thank you. Keep it real. Show the struggle. And it was a struggle. I am now in my dining room. I have kicked out my dog because she is too loud. And when she hears any noise, and especially with me being around almost all the time now, I think she's hyper aware that something is happening. But I'm in my dining room, literally sitting with my laptop, a mic, and my headset's kind of on my head because the way we're recording it is through Skype. But at the same time, we're using audio equipment that our super producer, Andrew, is going to have to fix and splice together. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
I'm definitely in pajama pants, no bra, a little bit of wine. I did at least brush my teeth and wash my face today, though.
I feel like I've been pretty good at maintaining some semblance of I put on clothes and I wash my face and I shower and I exercise. But who knows how long that will last.
I definitely only exercised for the first time yesterday for about 30, 45 minutes. If you follow my Twitter, you will see that it did not really help in comparison to all that I've ingested. Just saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a struggle. Yeah, I am recording from my closet.
Yes, I see all the games.
Yeah, there's games and books and mostly costumes. This is my costuming closet.
You have a really big closet.
Thank you. I don't know why I feel so proud to have a big closet.
Go ahead.
A lot of people who have visited my apartment don't even know this exists. And then when I show them, they're always like, oh, wow. But it's cozy. It's cozy. I posted a picture as well if anyone wants to see it. But it is right next to a window, and I've done my best to soundproof. But if you hear birds or traffic, just bear with us as we work out the kinks in this system. So how is your quarantine going?
I will say I have been a lot luckier than some. I do have a partner. I think I've talked about him a little bit. Where he is around because he's literally my downstairs neighbor. Yeah, that's a whole big story. And so essentially we live together but don't. So we can be away from each other, but together.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a perfect little setup, I will say that. I feel like I'm definitely getting antsy. I think that's the best word I can think of it because I get into the point where my house gets cluttered with things. And I'm at this point where everything's cluttered, but at the same time is kind of there for a purpose. But I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed.
Sure.
But I think I'm doing okay. I know that I'm faring better than most. So I feel very privileged in that. But how are you doing? Because I know you were alone. And it gets me a little worried.
I'm a very social creature. And I know I talked about in our trauma miniseries, one of the ways I cope is by constantly keeping myself busy. And that is harder to do when you can't leave.
Right.
And like Atlanta, of course, Atlanta is miserable weather for months. And right when the city's like, everyone, do not leave your place, it's beautiful outside.
And it's so gorgeous.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
But I have been staying in touch with people, and we're working on, the virtual watch parties. Samantha and I are talking about doing some of those ourselves. So finding these virtual ways to have company and to keep contact with people has been really, really helpful.
Right. I think I will say, I do love the fact that we're almost more in touch with each other now than we were before, because we're like, hey, and I was talking about a previous episode where we have just an app, whether it's the GoToMeeting, Zoom, whatever, and we have it up all day, not necessarily because we're watching and talking to each other all day, but the option of, hey, this silly thing just happened. And we've never done that before. But now that we're like, oh, this is what we can do now that we are absolutely all alone or with only the one person who may not understand what we're talking about in comparison to. So that has been kind of nice to see. I mean, when it comes down to communication wise, it's been nice to see in trying to bond with each other. And I will say, yeah, this definitely has brought in a whole level of, I think this is when people talking about going in through like a military service together, where only you guys know what it feels like to be in that weird situation. This quarantine life has kind of put us all on that same page.
Yeah, like globally.
Yeah, it really has.
It has. And I did want a quick note before we get into our episode. Did want to say we were pretty far ahead before this happened.
Right.
So you're going to hear some episodes that we recorded in the before times come out after this one. And I think it will be pretty obvious which ones those are. But just wanted to put that out there. We are doing our bit. We're quarantining. We're social distancing. But there are some episodes you're going to hear that we recorded in some cases like months ago.
Right.
That are only going to just come out probably in April. So there's that note. And relevant to this episode, which is a book club episode, I remember when we first said, like, we're going to make this book club happen, we both had concerns about, well, how are we going to read one book a month? And now I'm kind of like, hey.
And I will say for books like this, because another listener had also said the same thing, that it took her 2 days to read this. It took me like a day and a half to read this. It was a really good, simple read, very fantasy level. So stuff like this is like, okay, well, this is not too bad.
Yeah, it was a quick read. So what we're talking about for this edition of Book Club is Ash by Malinda Lo. And Samantha and I are doing it with wine.
Yes, we are definitely making this an official book club by adding our own little beverages. And for those who don't drink, I hope you're listening with whatever sparkling water you want, just a regular water, iced tea, hot tea, whatever. Just join, cuddle up, and imagine this as our book club together.
Our book club together. I love it. And this was actually a listener recommendation from forever ago when I asked for LGBTQ plus fiction. So thanks to the people who wrote in and suggested this one. And always, always, always keep those recommendations coming. We need our next book for next month's book club. We need our next movie for Feminist Movie Friday. Please send in your suggestions.
Yes.
But for today, okay, Ash, let's talk about the plot.
Yeah, so the story is a reimagining of the Cinderella fairy tale, complete with fairies and magic, split up into 2 sections, which is the fairy and the hundreds. It's a tale of loneliness and love and magic. It follows Aisling, or Ash, and it opens with her mother's death as a young girl, and it's clear that they are very close, and the death really impacts Ash.
And I wanted to put in here one of my worst auditions ever, and that's actually quite the feat because I've had some bad auditions, was for one of the stepsisters in Cinderella. But to be fair or to not be fair, I was trying to get out of band practice. I actually didn't really care. I just knew if I auditioned, I didn't have to go to band practice. So.
Oh, that's fair.
Yeah.
We had Into the Woods with one of our plays, and I played the mother of Jack and the Beanstalk.
Oh.
That was pretty funny. I'll say. I feel like I was pretty funny. I got a lot of laughs that I do remember. But to go back to the name Ash, obviously, is a reference to the Cinderella fairy tale where she's falling asleep in the ashes or cinders of the hearth. And according to Lo, it also means dreams or visions. And Ash has a lot of those throughout the story. It's definitely intertwined throughout.
Oh, yeah. And we forgot to mention, but we were accidentally timely with this pick because 2019 was the 10-year anniversary of this book.
Yeah,
so
they re-released it.
They did.
It seemed really perfectly timed.
Yeah. But anyway, the world it takes place in is in the middle of a transition between the old-fashioned ways of magic and those that believe the stories of magic are all fairy tales. Ash's mother, Eleanor, fell into the old-fashioned camp, and she was what was called a green witch. They created potions and they cast spells, some of which her mother recorded in books that later become a huge comfort to Ash when Ash finds them. She also left behind books of fairy tales that Ash reads pretty much every night. One in particular is her favorite, about a girl who essentially dies to live in the fairy world. She chooses kind of eternal sleep, I think, to be in the fairy world as opposed to existing in the real world. Ash frequently sleeps by her mother's grave, hoping to see a fairy and believing that the fairies will be able to reunite her with her mother.
And then her father, meanwhile, fell into the more logical camp. Soon after his wife dies, he leaves for the city of Royal City to do some trading, leaving Ash at their home in Rook Hill on the border of the mysterious wood with a capital W, a place stories say is home to all of the fairies. And when he returned, it's with a new wife named Isabel and her two daughters, Anna and Clara. Ash is obviously unhappy with the situation, feeling as though it was a betrayal to her mother. I can see that. And she continues to search the woods for the fairies and finally makes contact with one. He instructs her to leave, angrily calling her a fool for looking for them at all.
Right. When Ash returns home, she discovers her father has fallen seriously ill. One of her mother's friends and fellow Green Witch pushes for treatment of the old ways, telling Isabel if she calls for a physician, it will make things worse. Isabel ignores her, and soon after, Ash's father dies. She and her stepmother and stepsisters move into Isabel's house called the Quinn House at West Riding, which is 5 miles outside of Royal City and is the famous staging ground of the Royal Hunt. These hunts are always led by women called huntresses.
Which is awesome.
Yes.
This way. So soon after, Isabel informs Ash that her father left behind a series of debts, and to pay them off, she demands that Ash works as a servant. And she works from dawn till dusk, dealing with her stepmother's cruel treatment and abuse that often involves striking Ash and locking her in the cellar. But at night, she reads the stories her mother left her. When she can, she sneaks out to the woods searching for fairies in a way to bring her mom back. And she again runs into the fairy she met earlier. He's intimidating and mysterious and gives off an air of danger. I'm not going to lie. When I read this, I kind of thought of like the Twilight level of Edward.
Yeah.
I did wonder that. So throughout the series, she has a lot of meetings and she learns his name is Sheen. And she begs him to take her with him to the fairy world, but he keeps saying it's not time yet.
Also, shout out to Malinda Lowe for having a section on her website on how to pronounce all the names. I really appreciate that.
We need those, obviously.
Anytime you can write out the pronunciation of things, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. So years go by. Ash becomes very familiar with the trails of the royal woods. She continues to meet with Sheen, and they develop an uneasy friendship, I guess. At the same time, Anna, the oldest daughter, becomes of age, which means Isabel regularly takes her to the city to find a rich husband. And they are very transparent that is what they are all about. Anna bickers with her younger sister about it, kind of insinuating that the younger sister doesn't know anything. They are both excited, though, at the prospect of meeting Prince Aidan. One day, Ash falls asleep in the woods, and when she awakes, she sees a woman drinking from the river. They make eye contact, and the woman smiles before disappearing into the wood, and Ash later dreams about this woman.
Ash is taken to the city to act as a servant for her stepfamily during Yule. There she meets fellow servant Gwen, and they become friends. It's really nice to have a few characters who actually like her. Thank you.
Yeah.
Because it's so dark. So they attend a party for the servants. And Ash sees the woman from the wood and realizes she is the royal huntress.
Yeah.
And Ash sees her again later and is sad when she leaves the party early. Feeling lonely, Ash skips out on the party too. And that night, Gwen probes Ash about her feelings about men, obviously, and who she wants to marry. And Ash feels uncomfortable, unsure. And the conversation makes Ash think of a different kind of love, and she obviously desperately misses her mother. Gwen gives her a spell meant to give her dreams of her future husband. Ash takes it, and then they return to Quinn House.
The morning after they return, Ash gives the spell to her stepsister, Anna, and it does not work, and Anna angrily calls her rustic. Ash goes out that night to meet Sheen, who tells her that he knew her mother. He protects her from other fairies, informing them that Ash belongs to him. But still, he tells her it is not time. But he does give her a medallion to wish for impossible things. Enter the Huntress.
Mm-hmm.
Ash meets her again in the forest where the huntress is tracking a deer, and they chat about how they've come across each other several times. Ash pulls the classic "I'm lost" routine to spend more time with her, even though she was not lost at all. We learn the huntress's name is Kaisa, and that they both share a love of the forest.
So during this time, Anna begins courting a man, or a man begins courting Anna, leaving Ash alone at Quinn House more often. Yay. This allows her more time to wander into the woods and hang with Kaisa. Kaisa offers to teach her how to ride a horse, and they spend several afternoons riding through the forest. Kaisa provides the horse and clothing, saying, "You can't ride a horse in a dress." I guess that's true.
You can, but it's difficult.
Yeah, I feel like that
here.
can be a pain. I don't ride horses, so yes, maybe.
No, I don't either.
They become closer, and Kaisa divulges some of her history and how she became the royal huntress. And she tells Ash her favorite fairy tale, a story of a huntress who fell in love and made a deal with a fairy to make all of this happen. And the deal required her to spend time with the fairy queen, and as time passed, the huntress instead fell in love with the fairy queen instead of the one that she was going after. And the fairy queen loved her as well. Ash is more hesitant, believing her station effectively renders her a nobody, and is also always torn with thoughts of Sheen in the fairy world. She says perhaps one day she'll share her favorite fairy tale with Kaisa, and it's all kind of awkward and sweet and full of UST, who Anney is having to put in here for me because I didn't know what this was, which means unresolved sexual tension. Thank you, fanfiction world.
Yes. Thank you so much, Fanfiction World. You've helped me get through this quarantine like you would not believe. Eventually, Kaisa asks if Ash would like to join her on the King's Hunt, and Ash feels like she has never wanted anything more in her life. So she uses the medallion to ask Sheen to make this a reality, because her stepmother would never allow it. He tells her there will be a price, and she agrees, rather quickly in my opinion, she agrees. The wish provides her with a horse, some well-fitting clothes, and a fairy to take Ash's place so that they don't notice she's missing. But the fairy does tell her that she will be recognized by those that know her. The hunt commences. A stag is caught. Much celebration is had. Kaisa's apprentice, Lore, consistently hints that Kaisa has feelings for Ash. Kaisa and Ash have an awkward goodbye since Ash can't explain her haste and nerves and why she has to leave so suddenly as the magic wears off. And then Prince Aiden, remember Prince Aiden from before?
Wait, who?
Who? He's essentially the prince in this Cinderella tale, sends out a letter to every eligible woman to attend a ball that he reluctantly, it's hinted, is throwing in search of a wife. Anna is set on being that wife. So, of course, it culminates in Kaisa asking Ash to Prince Aiden's ball, the Soul's Night Masquerade. She again goes to Sheen for a wish to let her attend the ball. He reminds her that she will have to pay, and she again agrees. And this is after Ash asks Kaisa if she would not want to be a princess, and Kaisa says it depends on if it means marrying a prince, which I like.
Ooh, very heavy hint. And so the day of the ball, Ash finds a very beautiful dress and jewels laid out for her. A carriage awaits, but the driver warns her the magic will wear off at midnight, very Cinderella-esque. With a mask over her face, Ash weaves through the crowd before she is asked to dance by a mysterious man. Ash agrees, and after the man leads her to her room and asks her to wait, impatient, Ash leaves and searches for Kaisa. It's revealed that the man Ash danced with was, of course, Prince Aiden. And Ash is the talk of the ball because, you know, she's gorgeous in this new made-up way. Kaisa tells Ash she does not like masks and that while the dress is beautiful, it doesn't really suit her. Kaisa deduces that Ash has a debt, but Ash refuses to tell her about it. Kaisa promises Ash that her help comes without a price and that it is her choice, but Ash turns her down and is forced to leave as the bell tolls.
Unfortunately, though, she does not beat her stepmother home, and she is accused of stealing. How did she get this beautiful dress and all these jewels? And she is accosted and struck several times by her stepmother. Her stepsister rips the jewels from her hair before she is locked in the cellar. When she is released, she ventures into the wood knowing the time to pay up has come, and she learns that her mother cursed Sheen after he tried persistently to bring her to the fairy world. And so she cursed him with falling in love with a human girl so that he would understand love and what it was he was doing and why it was wrong, bringing humans into the fairy world against their will. Unfortunately, he ended up falling for her daughter. Oh no, Ash. He calls it agony and sees that something has changed within Ash, that Ash no longer wants to give up her life for the fairy world, that her favorite fairy tale is no longer her favorite fairy tale. She wants to live.
Right. And unafraid of her stepmother in the face of possibly never seeing Kaisa again, Ash goes to the ball where the prince is to announce his chosen bride. She wades through the crowd in her cloak and servant's dress and asks Kaisa for a dance. Kaisa agrees and everyone is shocked. They kiss, but then Ash admits she must leave and that she hopes that they will see each other again. And I do want to point out that the sister Clara seems to be actually a good character as well. I think they seem to bond at this point.
At the end, they certainly do. She's the most sympathetic of the three. And that's not saying much for a lot of the story, but towards the end, for sure.
Right.
So Ash rushes off to Sheen, and she tells him that if he loves her, he will set her free. He agrees on the condition they spend one night together, and time is different in the fairy world. So one night could be a long time in the fairy world. And Samantha and I are going to return to our different views on what this meant later. But he promises her she will wake up the next morning in her own world. She asks if she will die, and he says only a little. So the next morning, she does wake up. She goes to find Kaisa and tells her she is free to love her. And they kiss happily ever after. End of story, end of fairy tale. So that's the plot. And now we're going to discuss some tropes and some of our thoughts about it. But first, we're going to take a quick break for a word from our sponsor. And we're back. Thank you, sponsor. So one of the big themes in this is one we've talked about a lot, and is one that is in a lot of children's stories especially, and fairy tales especially, and that is of the mother-stepmother. Usually the mother dying and the stepmother being evil and trying to take her place. And I will say it's interesting in the case of this story, you never know for sure whether the stepmother was lying about her father's deaths.
Right.
You don't know.
You never know what she was implying and or what he had done for her, what hadn't done for her. There's also this whole like, you obviously have a big villain. There's nothing about her that you would want to give sympathy to. She is very obviously the evil stepmother.
Yeah. And it's been a long time since I've seen the Disney version of Cinderella. Or read
she's
it.
Evil.
Oh, I know she is. I was just trying to think of comparisons. I really loved Ever After when I was in middle school. I loved that movie.
Look, I continued throughout the entire time I was reading this, comparing it to Ever After, because it was very similar. Because again, Clara and the other stepsister, they were very sympathetic to Cinderella / Ash. And so that was very similar to that as well. But Angelica Houston did an amazing job in that, at the very least, in Ever After, you knew she loved him. Like, that was the one thing that she had. She may have had disdain for the Cinderella character, but she loved the husband.
Right. And I feel like in this one, the best argument you could make that she is sympathetic is that the whole system they were caught up in, that there's no other way to get money or to have property or whatever it is. So there is this level of tension. And it's even addressed outright at one point where Ash feels something like sympathy for Anna, even though Anna is terrible to her.
Right.
Because she sees this pressure that Isabel is putting on her daughter to find, like, you have to do this,
Right.
or else the whole family is going to have no money and no station, and what will we do?
Right. And then you do feel sympathy with her trying desperately to find a husband with the curse, or not the curse, with the spell, which obviously she didn't care for.
Right. Yeah, that whole scene of, so we're talking about the part where Ash gave Anna the spell because she noticed that Anna was taking part in this day of fasting that is sort of a old ways magic thing. And you say the spell and you fast, and then you dream of your husband at night. So she notices that Anna is fasting and gives her the spell. And it kind of reminds me of the whole thing where you're so desperate, or I've seen this play out where people are so desperate to lose weight, and they'll try diets that they honestly don't really believe in, but they're like, I'm so desperate, I've got to do this thing. So even though she doesn't believe in it, she's just feeling that level of desperation. I will try this spell, even though I think it is rustic, especially when it doesn't work. All of a sudden, it's like the stupidest thing ever.
Right.
Yeah. So that's a big trope. Another one related is sort of this women's intuition versus men's logic. And we see that play out with witches and the spells and potions that Ash's mother took part in. And also this whole like old world, new world fantasy versus the real world thing.
Right.
Yeah. So it is odd reading it with our modern eyes, because like the scene where her dad is dying, you're definitely, as a reader, meant to be like, no, stick to the old ways.
Right.
And which they should, in this story, they should have. He was getting better. It just didn't look exactly like how they thought it would. And it was kind of slower than they thought. So they switched the position, and that killed him. But looking at it through our modern eyes, you're like, no, science.
That is very reminiscent of Pan's Labyrinth, if you think about that.
Oh, it's been so long since I've seen that.
You know, when the mother is sick and she starts putting the things underneath the bed, and the father and the husband's like, no, Matt, like, get rid of this. This is nonsense. But she was actually getting better. And then they got rid of all of that, and she ended up dying. But yeah, it's kind of that same level of old culture versus new culture, new technology.
Yeah. And you see it also in Sleepy Hollow. Yeah, Christina Ricci and her doing the eye under the bed, and people not understanding what she was doing and thinking it was evil. So there is that. And then also, yeah, the whole thing, the book being divided into the two sections, the fairy and the huntress, sort of represents Ash's decision she has to make. Is she going to give up everything and go into this fantasy world with the fairy, which is where the first half of the book is, that is her goal. That is what she wants. Or, especially as it moves into the later part of the book, is she going to give up on bringing her mother back on this fairy tale world and be with someone she loves in the real world?
Right.
The huntress.
Right. And I think a lot of that, too, is also about going through grief a little bit, that desperation to go back to and wanting that person that you lost, but sometimes moving past that and accepting what has happened and going into a better version of, and not for everyone, but that this is a very like binary idea, but it is like, okay, accepting death and then moving on to live.
Right. And that's what she ends up doing, is she chooses the real world and life after she has squared her debts and can enter a relationship fully and openly. And there's one scene in the book, the jewels that Anna tore out of Ash's hair, when they wake up the next day, they're worthless and fake. So there is that whole layer too of fantasy and these dreams, these daydreams that we have. And what does Dumbledore say? It does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live. It's kind of that whole thing where it's not real. It's all fake. And one big thing of this book, I will say, is somberness and loneliness. That is a theme throughout. So it totally makes sense that she's fantasizing about this, what she believes to be this better world where she doesn't have an evil stepmother and two stepsisters that don't treat her well, and she isn't totally alone, and maybe her mother is there. Like, it's kind of, like you said, it's almost reminiscent of the stages of grief of bargaining. Another trope we wanted to talk about is mask, and especially in the context of assumed heterosexuality, because I think if I had read this book and I had not known going in that was an LGBTQ plus story, I would have assumed, okay, the Prince Aiden, they're gonna end up somehow together. And
I do love that it's a nonsensical bit of like, it could have just not even been in the story. You wouldn't have noticed.
I love when she sees him the first time. She's like, oh, he's not that handsome.
Right. They're like, this is the guy that they're fighting over? They said he was handsome? Are you kidding me?
I liked that.
I'm not going to lie. I think I had a Seth Rogen picture of like, he's assumed to be handsome because he's got A, B, C, and D. But in actuality, he's fine. There's nothing wrong with him, but there's nothing really great about him. He
reminded me of Prince Harry. I think he was described as having like thin red hair. I could be wrong, but that was the image I got in my head.
Oh, I guess I also pictured like a little bit of like a dad bod happening. Nothing wrong with that.
For sure. No.
But I'm just saying, like, that's what I imagine as instead of like your Chris Evans or Chris Hemsworth, which typically is the prince.
Traditional, like, what is it? Lauren and our coworker and friend Lauren, she calls that Disney Prince bod.
Yeah.
So if I hadn't known going in, even though I do feel the romance with Kaisa and Ash, it was very clear when I knew that. I don't know if I would have picked up on it otherwise. And I also was thinking, like, if Kaisa had been a guy, it would have changed how I felt about certain scenes, because there's one part where she shows up at her house kind of unannounced when she's alone, and that would have had a different vibe.
Right.
If it had been a dude, at least for me. I don't think it necessarily has to, but.
Right. I think there was also a part of that they make Kaisa a little bit masculine in that she seems to be a player. Laura even says, I thought you were just one more of her lovers.
Right.
And I feel like that was purposeful. And I wondered why that would be that, other than to play on the fact, maybe to talk about that in that society, that was not an abnormal thing for same-sex couple to happen. They seemed accepted. But at the same time, B, that she got around. And so you maybe it's supposed to put that little bit of doubt of like whether you're special or not. And so they need to make sure she understood how special she was. But I was like, that's kind of like, maybe that's an understatement to say it seems masculine-esque to put that in terms of someone who is very powerful and or seen as powerful.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of that is, this book came out in 2009, which a lot has changed since then.
Right.
And just a way of being like, nah, she might be interested in you. Like you. Because Ash was kind of, maybe oblivious isn't the right word, but she didn't seem to be picking up on a lot of things.
Right. Also, she was definitely that perfect, innocent girl who didn't know how amazing she was or how gorgeous she was. And I'm like, that is an absolute trope in itself, where she just doesn't know how beautiful she is. And we see it, but she doesn't.
She just needs to wipe the ash off her face.
We just need to straighten her hair and take off the glasses.
It is funny, though. You don't really, or maybe I missed it, but I feel like I didn't really get that vibe until someone outright says it. When Clara tells her that towards the, like, maybe like middle. Before that, I wasn't really sure. But yeah, Clara outright is like, oh, you're so beautiful. You're so much better than Anna.
Yeah, I think that's exactly where we were all trying to figure out, like, and that says a lot about myself and itself, like, how good looking is she? Could she get away with this in real life?
Yeah.
You know, and it could also talk about ableism and the fact that she is able to be perfectly, quote unquote, normal in that aspect.
Yeah. And one of the scenes, the scene where Kaisa says, like, I don't like mask, the dress looks good, but doesn't suit you. A lot of people have interpreted that as sort of a critique's not the right word, but like pointing to LGBTQ plus people having to wear this mask to hide their true selves. And so at the end, when Kaisa, I'm assuming kind of dramatically, shows up at the ball without a mask and is like, you, Kaisa, we're dancing together, and they kiss, is sort of her finally taking it off and being herself.
I mean, she does seem to have the struggle of like Sheen is declared as male, and then Prince Aiden, like she has these choices. What her preference is, or her sexuality leans towards Kaisa instead.
Yes, or that's who she loves. And speaking of love, that is another big trope in this whole thing. So there's the trope of marrying rich and classism, which throughout Ash feels like she is not worthy of Kaisa because she is a servant. So there is this layer of like, I am not in your class, so we cannot be together. And there's a whole scene where Ash tells Clara, you know, you don't have to marry for riches, you can marry for love. And that's sort of the beginning of their tentative truce, even though Clara totally rejects her when she says it the first time, because she's like, you don't understand what it's like. Like, there's so much pressure to do this. And if I don't, then how will I live? So there's that. And as we talked about, Ash having this pity around the pressure placed on Anna by her mother to marry someone of high status. There's Gwen, who seemingly does not understand that Ash doesn't want to be with someone, particularly a man, that it's not her whole thing, that it's not her end-all, be-all.
Right. I think Gwen's character is definitely the giggly schoolgirl.
Sure. Yeah. I loved Gwen. She's like, every time you see her, she has a different, like, dude she's after.
Right. I mean, that's exactly the point. I think she was the comic relief in it all. I did want to talk about the fact that I found it interesting when she, in comparison to the hunting outfit that the fairies gave her versus the dress that the fairies gave her, and her feeling, and also being the fact that the boots were supposed to be her slippers, even though she never lost her slippers, but that it fit to her feet so perfectly.
Right.
And I find that she was more comfortable, which could be a hit or miss in conversations when it comes to the LGBTQ expectations of dressing in general. But I found that an interesting commentary.
Yeah, because the woods was such a big part of who she was and what she loved. But, okay, we would be remiss if we did not talk about what we said we would, which is where Samantha and I had a very different interpretation, and it's really telling of our personalities about what happened when she agreed to spend the night with Sheen.
Right. I think this is a good time for an ad break, and then we come back in, because I think it's a good minute of a conversation.
All right. So we'll take one more quick break, and then we'll be back. We're back. Thank you, sponsor. Okay.
Right. So I'm gonna go ahead and jump in, because I found it very interesting and very telling for both of us, because we also had our producer Andrew as a part of this conversation towards the end, before we started recording this portion, that there is a conversation of the fact that she has to prove to him what love is and what love truly means, and that according to the mother's book, the way to break this deal, to break this curse, I guess, / deal conversation, is to show him, Sheen, what love truly is. Right. And love means sacrificing or giving up that person if they don't love you, essentially. But that still promised a night. And we did talk about the fact that the fairy world, a night might be longer than a night. But in essence, like, he grabs her hands and they talk about what this looks like and if she's going to die a little bit, all of these things. So for me, as a very I will say it's a very heteronormative relationship, but at the same time, and I do enjoy, we talk about sex and what we enjoy and what we don't enjoy. But I'm like, yeah, obviously part of the giving of the love was her giving up her virginity and having sex with the dude, as to show, yeah, this is love. This is us together. This is giving to each other, whatever, whatnot. And that was my explanation of what he expected from love. And Anney,
that never even occurred to me. Not once. I never thought they had sex. I just thought they spent some weird time in fairy world. And I was shocked that this was an interpretation.
So my interpretation of her interpretation was what? This is like a 1950s Leave It to Beaver type of episode where they sleep in single beds next to each other and just call each other mama and papa for a little bit and move on in life.
Yes.
And end of fairy tale.
We should come back and talk about this more in depth because I have been thinking about this a lot. I had a really enlightening conversation with my friend about essentially what is love. And I guess to me, love? Like, exactly.
Baby, don't hurt me.
Had a day was there don't before anybody. But essentially, I guess I assumed, to me, love is respect and consent. And so I assumed, like, if he truly loved her and she doesn't want to do that, then they didn't do it. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's really naive and oblivious of me, but that was my thought. Like, maybe she did.
And I saw from her point of view that this is the sacrifice she was willing to give to be released from this contract, which is a very different tale in itself that she knew. And I assume when she asked him, am I going to die? And he said, just a little. I assume that it was part of, because it's the mourning of a loss of something of yourself.
Sure.
Which is a whole deeper perception. And not everyone has those experiences, and that takes it down to a really dark road. But the level of sacrifice, 2009, Malinda Lo, I can't tell you what she was thinking, but in that mindset of what are you willing to go ahead and get through with in order to get back to your own, and what does that look like? And we've had this conversation of many women, somehow I'm taking it back to here, who have always been to that portion of it was easier just to get it over with than to fight it. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the same culmination of what I saw her saying, might as well get this done with. I'll sacrifice this bit of myself to get to the happiness that I need to get to.
Yeah, and I totally understand and see that point, and probably that is what...
I don't know if that's the truth. I mean, I like your version better, where they just hang out and watch some Netflix and they eat some popcorn and then call it a night and go to their separate bedrooms and end the story.
Well, and I want to come back and talk about this so badly because I feel like this is something I've been struggling with. I know for a lot of people, sex is a part of that. Mm-hmm. But for someone like me, it's not. And so it's caused a lot of anxiety and just like concern in my own relationships because it literally didn't even occur to me.
Right.
And I think that says a lot.
Right. And I'm really sad that we didn't have that on record, me and you recording this conversation that you and I had, because it was such a big what moment that it was
like what are you talking about?
Yeah, it really was. And I'm thinking, wow.
I think maybe I am just very not, I'm just very oblivious.
I want to live in your world.
I don't know. We should definitely come back and talk about it though, because it has been on my mind a lot lately. Because I had a friend, she was talking about, I don't want to go into the whole conversation, but basically it boiled down to, I couldn't believe that if someone wanted to have sex with me, that they thought I had any other value. Like that is all they want. So for me, like, I think there's some kind of disconnect between sex and love, and it's all messed up. So I think
that could be said for everyone else, but the level of trauma or just the level of preference in itself can make it very disjointed in the conversation in itself.
For sure. So that is a conversation we shall return to.
Yes.
Yes. And I think, like, we both agreed, overall, the book was really good, but I know a listener wrote in and said it's kind of anticlimactic. It does feel like it's like, it leads up to it and then it just ends, which I know fairy tales are like that. Like, that's the whole thing, is it's happily ever after, and you just assume how their life plays out. But yeah, overall, I enjoyed it. And I'm not really big into romance, but I was like, yay, get together. Please.
And yeah, again, just like we were talking about, a previous listener said it was a really easy read. And it was a really easy read. It's like maybe a 2-hour read. Nice little moment of,
yeah,
what would happen if fairies exist?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. So those are our thoughts on Ash by Malinda Lo. And now we need your thoughts on what our next book should be so we can get to reading.
Cool.
Please send in your suggestions. Any movie suggestions too for our next Feminist Movie Friday, and any streaming and entertainment recommendations, which I actually logged into Netflix for the first time in I don't know how long.
Really?
And I was shocked at autoplay. I do not approve. I hear you can turn it off.
You can.
But it's not my account. So I'll check with the owner of the account about that.
Well, all of Supernatural is on there, Anney. So if you want to start from season 1 all the way through, it's all the way there. Don't tell me about the final season because I haven't seen it.
Well, the newest episode came out this Monday, and they said they don't know when they're going to come back. So yeah, you might have to wait a long time.
Oh, no. Well, maybe they'll add it to Netflix. But yeah, so tell us their streaming recommendations, because I've watched the same 4 shows repeatedly. Because I'm still in the realms of leaving the social work world, so I don't like anything too realistic or too traumatic. Don't give me those. But we need good suggestions. We all obviously have already talked about doing a Netflix party where we get to watch a couple of things. Maybe we could do it as a whole with SMNTY, because I don't know if too many people would be interested, but if y'all are interested, maybe we can have one giant Netflix party.
Oh, yeah.
With our SMNTY listeners, where we get to just chat. Because I know y'all are looking for content, something different, and please let us know what you want, because we are just as confused.
We are. And we'll definitely do a roundup of suggestions people send in, and we'll add our own suggestions in case you are looking for some streaming recommendations or other entertainment recommendations. So if you would like to email us those recommendations, you can. Our email is stuffmediamomstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can also find us on Instagram at Stuff Mom Never Told You, or on Twitter at MomStuffPodcast. Thanks as always to our super producer, Andrew Howard.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff Mom Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.